You know, at 64, I've had time to sit with things I used to run past. People always want to talk about the fastest, the records, the medals, who was the greatest. And I understand that. For a long time, that was the only question that mattered to me too. Who crossed the line first? Who stood on the podium? Who the world remembered? But that's not the question that stays with you. Not when the noise fades, not when the race is over. The real question is, who made you feel like you were losing control even when you were at your best? Not the most decorated, not the most famous, the ones who changed the way you ran, the way you thought, the way you saw yourself when you stepped onto that track. Because the Olympics, they don't just measure speed, they reveal something else, something quieter, something you don't always want to see. I've faced a lot of athletes, different eras, different styles, different kinds of pressure. Some of them people expect me to name, some of them they won't. But each one took something from me in a moment I thought I understood. And once you feel that, you don't forget it. Let me start with someone everyone already has in mind, Carl Lewis. We weren't friends. In the Olympics, you don't build friendships the way people think. You build awareness. You study habits. You learn how someone moves before the gun, how they settle into their lane, how they carry pressure without showing it. And with Carl Lewis, that awareness came early. I remember watching him long before we stood next to each other on the biggest stage. Carl Lewis didn't rush anything. He didn't look like he needed to prove something every time he stepped out there. There was a calm to him that didn't belong to the moment. It felt like it came from somewhere deeper. Like he had already decided how the race would unfold. And when you're a sprinter, that kind of presence gets inside you because you want control. You want the race to live inside your body. Your start, your drive phase, your transition. That's where I built everything. My strength was always in those first steps. Explosive, direct, no hesitation. But Carl Lewis, he didn't need to meet you there. The problem started after that. Once he got into his stride, everything changed. It wasn't sudden. That's what made it worse. His stride just kept opening smooth and balanced, like he wasn't reaching for speed. He was letting it come to him. And while you were pushing, forcing every meter to stay ahead, he was taking space without looking like he was trying. That's when the pressure shifts. I remember the 1,988 Seoul Olympics. Standing on that line, I felt ready, completely ready. The kind of readiness you don't question. I trusted my start. I trusted my power. When the gun went off, I did exactly what I was supposed to do. I drove out hard, clean, controlled. For those first meters, I felt the race was mine. But that wasn't the hardest part, because somewhere in the middle of that race, there's a moment you can't train for. You're still running your plan. Your body is doing what it's supposed to do. But you feel something change, not in your legs, but in your awareness. Carl Lewis was still there, not fading, not panicking, just present. And that's when control slips. Not all at once, just enough. Enough to make you question whether your rhythm is holding or starting to break. Enough to make every step feel slightly heavier than the one before. Carl Lewis didn't take races from you with force. He took them by staying exactly the same while everything in you started to tighten. And in a race that lasts less than 10 seconds, that's everything. I crossed that line knowing something had shifted. Not just in the result, but in how I understood speed. It wasn't just about how fast you could go. It was about how long you could stay yourself under pressure. Carl Lewis never lost that. You don't forget races like that. But he wasn't the only one. Before the world started talking about me and Carl Lewis like it was the only story that mattered, there was another name that sat quietly in the background, setting the standard, Calvin Smith. We didn't have the same kind of rivalry people remember. There wasn't the same spotlight. No headlines built around tension, but that doesn't mean he wasn't there. He was, and in some ways that made him harder to deal with, because with Calvin Smith, you weren't reacting to noise, you were reacting to precision. I first became aware of him the way most sprinters do, by watching times, by seeing what was possible before you've done it yourself. And back then, his name kept showing up in places that mattered. Fast times, clean races, no wasted movement. And when you finally see him in person, it matches exactly what you expected. And that's the problem. He didn't look intimidating, no big gestures, no extra energy, just quiet efficiency. The kind that makes you realize this isn't about overpowering someone. It's about matching something you don't fully control yet. What made Calvin Smith difficult wasn't one thing you could point to. It was how little he gave you to work with. His rhythm was consistent. Step after step, nothing broke down. No panic, no visible strain. And when you're in a race, you're always looking for something, a sign, a tightening shoulder, a slight drop in cadence, anything that tells you the other guy is human. With him, you didn't get that. I remember races in the early 1980s when I was still building myself into the athlete I thought I could become. You line up, you execute your start, and for a brief moment, you believe you've created separation. But then you look across, and he's still there, not chasing, not reacting, just running his race exactly the way he planned it. That's when it becomes uncomfortable, because you start to realize this isn't about pushing harder. You can't rush him into a mistake. You can't force the race to break open. You're stuck inside your own effort trying to hold something together while he never loses it. That's a different kind of pressure. With some athletes, the race is explosive. With others, it's chaotic. But with Calvin Smith, it was controlled in a way that made your own control feel fragile. And when you feel that even for a second, it changes how you run. He didn't need to dominate the race to affect you. He just needed to stay the same, perfectly the same. And when someone can do that, when they don't give you a moment to attack, a moment to breathe, a moment to believe they're fading, you start fighting yourself instead of the race. That's what made him one of the greatest I ever faced. Not because he took something from me in one dramatic moment, but because he showed me something I didn't have yet, consistency under pressure. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Now is Lynford Christie. We came through the same era, felt the same weight of expectation, stood on similar tracks with everything on the line. But our paths didn't hold the same shape. Mine burned fast. His lasted, and when you step back and watch that, really watch it, it does something to you. Lynford Christie didn't carry himself like someone chasing the moment. He carried himself like someone waiting for it, patient, grounded. There was a physical presence to him, yes, strong, composed, almost immovable. But what stayed with me wasn't just how he looked. It was how little he seemed to change no matter what stage he was on. That's rare in sprinting, because most of us, we rise with the moment and sometimes we fall with it too. But Lynford Christie, he stayed. The problem with him didn't begin at the start. He wasn't the fastest out of the blocks. That was never really his identity. You could get ahead early. You could feel that edge in the first phase and believe you had control of the race, but that belief didn't last. As the race unfolded, his strength came through in a different way. His transition was steady, almost stubborn. He didn't rush into top speed. He built into it. And once he was there, he held it longer than you expected. That's where things begin to shift. Because sprinting isn't just about reaching your top speed. It's about holding it when your body starts asking you to let go. And Lynford Christie, he didn't let go. I remember watching the 1992 Barcelona Olympics years later, watching him step onto that track, not as a challenger, but as someone who had outlasted everything around him. Different names, different expectations, different narratives, and there he was, still composed, still present, still ready. And when the race unfolded, it wasn't explosive in the way people expect from a 100 meters final. It was controlled, measured. He didn't chase the moment, he absorbed it. Step by step, holding form, holding belief, holding something deeper than just speed. And when he crossed that line, it didn't feel like a surprise. It felt inevitable. That's what stayed with me. Because watching Lynford Christie win like that after everything that had come before it forces a different kind of reflection. Not about how fast you were, but how long you could sustain who you were under pressure. That's something I didn't get the chance to prove the same way. And that realization, it sits with you. He wasn't just another great athlete. He was a reminder that the race doesn't always belong to the fastest, Sometimes it belongs to the one who lasts. And once you understand that, you start to see the sport differently because speed fades, but presence, that's something else. And then came a different kind of athlete, one that didn't just continue the story, but changed the direction of it completely, Maurice Greene. By the time Maurice Greene took over the sport, I wasn't standing on that line anymore. But that doesn't mean you stop understanding it. You watch differently. You notice things you didn't have time to see when you were inside it. And with him, the first thing you noticed was intent. There was nothing quiet about Maurice Greene, nothing reserved. From the moment he stepped onto the track, you knew exactly what he came to do. He didn't hide it. He didn't soften it. That confidence, it wasn't for show. It was part of how he ran. And that changes the feeling of a race. Because with someone like Carl Lewis, the pressure builds slowly. It creeps into your awareness. But with Maurice Greene, it hits you immediately. The problem started at the gun. His reaction was explosive, not just fast, committed. He attacked the first steps like the race could be decided before anyone else even found their balance. And when you build your race around control, around structure, that kind of aggression forces you out of your rhythm because now you're not just running your plan, you're reacting. And reacting in 100 meters is where things begin to fall apart. I remember watching races in the late 1990s when he was at his peak. The way he transitioned out of his drive phase, the way his body rose into full stride, it was sharp, efficient, almost mechanical, but there was something else there too. He believed the race was already his. And when an athlete carries that belief into every step, it doesn't just affect them, it affects everyone around them. Because you start to question your own timing, your own decisions. Do you push earlier? Do you hold back? Do you change something that has always worked for you just to keep up with what you're seeing? That's where it becomes dangerous. Not because he takes something from you physically, but because he makes you doubt the structure you've built your entire race on. There were moments watching him dominate world championships and Olympic stages where you could see it clearly. He didn't need the race to unfold perfectly. He forced it into his shape from the very first step. And once he had that control, he didn't let it go. That's a different era of sprinting. More aggressive, more immediate, less about patience, more about ownership. And for someone like me who built everything on timing, on phases, on a certain kind of control, watching that shift tells you something important. The sport moves on. It doesn't wait. And the definition of greatness changes with it. Maurice Greene wasn't just fast. He represented something else. A version of sprinting where hesitation didn't exist. And when you see that clearly enough, you realize there are races you would have had to run differently to survive in that world. That's what makes him one of the greatest. Not just because of what he did, but because of what he changed. And then there's one more name, a different kind of story altogether, Asafa Powell. By the time Asafa Powell came into the picture, the sport had already shifted again. New standards, new expectations, new ways of measuring greatness. But what stood out about him wasn't just the times, it was the contrast. Because on pure ability, few athletes ever looked that smooth. The first time I really paid attention to Asafa Powell, it was the way he moved. No tension, no wasted motion. His start was clean, almost effortless. His acceleration didn't feel forced, it just happened. And when he reached top speed, it looked like he was gliding more than running. That kind of efficiency, it's rare, and it makes you believe something. It makes you believe that if you do everything right, if your technique is perfect, if your body responds exactly the way it should, then the result will follow. But the Olympics don't always work like that. And that's where his story becomes different. Because what made Asafa Powell difficult wasn't just how fast he could run. It was how unpredictable the moment could become around him. I remember watching Olympic finals where everything suggested he should control the race. The preparation was there. The times were there. The confidence, at least on the surface, was there. You look at him in the blocks, and nothing seems out of place. And then the race begins. The start is still good. The first phase still strong. The mechanics still there. But somewhere in the race, something shifts. Not in a visible, dramatic way, just enough to break the flow, enough to take him slightly out of the rhythm that made him so dangerous in the first place. And at that level, that's all it takes. Because when your strength is built on precision, even the smallest disruption feels larger than it should. You start chasing the race instead of letting it come to you. And once that happens, the advantage disappears. That's what stayed with me watching Asafa Powell. Not failure, not inconsistency in the way people talk about it, but the reminder that talent alone doesn't carry you through the Olympic moment. Timing does, presence does. The ability to stay exactly who you are when everything around you is trying to pull you out of it. He broke records. He showed what the human body could do when everything aligned perfectly. But the Olympics, they ask a different question. And sometimes the answer isn't about how fast you can be. It's about whether you can hold that speed when it matters most. That's what makes him one of the greatest in my eyes. Because he represents something every athlete understands, even if they don't say it out loud, how thin the line really is between control and losing it. And when you've felt that line for yourself, you never look at greatness the same way again. Looking back now, it was never just about the medal. People remember the time, the number, the finish. They replay the race like it was a clean, simple story. One man wins, one man loses. That's how it looks from the outside. But that's not how it feels when you're inside it, because in those few seconds, everything you are shows up at once. Your preparation, your fear, your belief, your doubt, all of it compressed into something that doesn't give you time to think, only time to reveal. And every athlete I face, each of them showed me a different version of that. Carl Lewis showed me what it meant to stay calm when everything else was speeding up. Calvin Smith showed me how fragile control really is when someone else never loses theirs. Lynford Christie showed me that time and patience can be just as powerful as speed. Maurice Greene showed me how the sport moves forward, whether you're ready for it or not. And Asafa Powell, he showed me how thin the line is between perfection and pressure. That's what stays with you. Not the medal, not the record, but the moments where something inside you shifted and you realized the race was never just against the man in the next lane. It was against everything you thought you understood about yourself. And maybe that's what the Olympics really are. Not a place where you prove you're the best, but a place where you find out who you are when it matters most.